most used tool in a wood shop. There will be a line backed up for this. There's a table saw right there. That's a regular table saw. The reason it's still here is because there's a lot of jigs for it for furniture making, for the furniture making class. It is a regular table saw. This is a Sawstop table saw. It has a computer in it that will sense if your finger touches it, and it will throw a cartridge into the blade, and the whole thing will shut down and suck the blade down into the machine, keeping you from hurting yourself. It's $80 per cartridge, but that's a lot cheaper than going to the ER or losing a finger, right? So this used to be probably the most dangerous tool in the room. Now it's one of the safest. Still means you need to have reverence for it. Still means you need to operate it properly. That saw is now the most dangerous tool, and it's still dangerous because it doesn't have that computer on it to tell it to stop the blade. I'm not going to go into changing blades right now. I'm just going to give you basic safety. What we have here is a fence and a crosscut sled. This sled allows me to cut material crossways. So I'll go ahead and I'll slide this in. And this does a lot of the time, like with a piece of material like this, I would just go to the compound miter saw. When I slide this in, there's two little slots that I can slide this into. I want to look at my angle, I want it at 0, and I want to tighten this up. Somebody missed this. Here it is, nice and tight. I want to also test it with a square if I'm doing any precision cutting. Now I can take and I can cut pieces off of the end of this. This whole thing slides. I can put a whole sheet of plywood on here and cut like 15, 16, 17 inch. I can cut it however I want, right? Because I have this whole sled going with it. We never use these two in conjunction with each other. But we can use this to say I want to have a whole bunch of pieces that are like 4 inches. This is a crosscut block. We go ahead and we take and we put this in here. We measure, if I want 3 inches, we measure and we add 3/4 of an inch. So I go 3 3/4 inch over here. With this in, I can bring my material here and then remove this, then cut. Then put this back in, measure it, pull it out, then cut. We don't want to use this because what it'll do is cause a kickback, it'll bind. I've got it between a rock and a hard place. We want to allow it the room to, if it needs to, if it's going to bind, if we put it rock and a hard place, we get a kickback and it throws it back at us. And it's aggressive. This thing is moving fast. The teeth are coming at you. So I want to think about, I never use a crosscut sled and my fence in the same cut. There's a little tab under here that you pull down, it's a little guy, and you pull down and twist. This will lock into place. This is the entire crosscut sled. This is the large one. We also have small ones, which are usually hanging here. So this is a miter sled. It goes in the miter slot. And we're doing the same thing here, just not as big of a surface to cut big panels. This will be for cutting panels. This will be cutting smaller pieces like this. I can change the angle so that I can get different angles as I cut through. I want to make sure that's tight. I never use the fence and the crosscut sled in the same while the machine is running. It has to have a gap between. Does that make sense? This used to hang down there, but it looks like it's hanging up here now. When I operate this machine, I want to have the kickback guard in it. Now, a lot of people, they're showboating, or they've been working in a wood shop forever, like, oh, I don't need the kickback guard. we operate with a kickback guard. So somebody has removed it, which is not okay. It's against policy. This saw, if I were to start it, would not run because if I was touching the blade. If I touch this blade and try to turn it on, it'll be like, nope, can't turn on because I know that somebody's touching it. But I still want to shut it off. There's a breaker switch in the front. I can just flip it off. And there's a breaker switch on the side. I turn them both off if I'm ever taking a blade in or out. So whenever we operate this piece of equipment, we want to have the kickback guard in place unless we're making a specific cut, which we will use the riving knife, which allows us to get in closer to make a thinner cut. This keeps the material from pinching in on itself because the grain will frequently release its tension and squeeze itself together, which puts pressure on the blade, which wants to force it back if you don't push it through. So the riving knife is an advanced technique. For those of you that have taken the furniture making class, we will not be using this. We'll be using this. Now this is a kickback. This is the kickback guard. It is attached permanently to this. It is removed. So when you find it, it should be connected here. And this has a vacuum hose hooked to the back of it. So the dust collector will pull the dust through here. So this will always be set up right here. If it's not being used and the riving knife is being used, it's generally up and out of the way. But it's always here. It's never disconnected. You pull the safety faceplate up, your machine is off, and I turn the power in 2 different places. If you come in here and look, you'll see a lever. We want that lever up in order to put it in. We'll take this, these 4 holes line up with pins that are in here. We'll drop it down in, we'll lower that lever. It's now installed. It's clamped down, it's got a little bit of play to it. What it does is as the material pushes through, there's these little locking teeth that grab it so that it can't come back this way. We'll go ahead and put our regular proper plate in, which allows us to have the kickback guard in. There's little tabs here and there's little tabs here. We want those guys lined up. We want to get the edge of one under the other. What I do to do that is kind of lower it down in, then drop it, then put that down. We're locked in place. The same rule for most every piece of equipment in here. You loosen the locking nut on the front and you can raise the height of the blade. I do not need my blade to be any greater than 1/4 of an inch above my material. It does no good. It doesn't cut any better, and all it does is expose more blade, making it more dangerous. I can then tighten down my locking nut on the front here, knowing that that's not going to change in height. If I want to change the angle, same thing on the side. There's a wheel here, and I will take that wheel, I'll loosen the nut, and I can change the angle just like I can do over there on the compound miter saw, and that would be for a compound miter. When I'm cutting with the fence, these 2 miter sled slots are considered the danger zone. We stay to the side of the danger zone. We stay to this side, or we stay to this side. I generally like to be on the fence side because I never want to reach across a blade, and I never want my fingers within 3 inches of the blade. So this, even though this is 3.5 inches wide, I would still use a push stick to push this through in order to make a clean cut safely. I'm going to go ahead and lower my safety glasses. I'm going to set my fence, I'll press down my measurements on this side. If my fence is on this side of the blade, the measurement's over here. You'll see the line right there. I'm going to hold my material into the fence and down. I'm going to continue to push it through. I'm going to hold pressure. I'm going to always have a hand on this until I can be a little bit more relaxed. Once it's engaged in the kickback guard, you can see here, that's the kickback guard. If you raise this blade too high, the kickback guard won't engage. So that's another reason why you only go about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch above the material. I'll push it all the way through. I want to make sure that I'm pressing down on top of the table. Push it all the way through. Turn off the machine. Then I can remove my material from the machine. So I never reach across the blade. I use a push stick within 3 inches, and I wait until the blade is completely stopped before I remove my pieces from the table saw. I always remove jewelry, even a ring. I'm going to take this off, put it in a safe place in there. Hair tied back, no ill or loose fitting clothing, no dangling jewelry, none of that. You want to have safety glasses. I always have hearing protection. I can't force you to wear hearing protection, but if I see you in here without safety glasses on, you'll be out. So we go ahead, turn the breaker back on. It's going to come up. It's going to have a series of green and red flashing lights. If it's flashing alternatively, that's a code for something's wrong with the machine. Once the red light stops flashing, it's just green. I can pull the paddle switch out and it'll start. When I stop, I can push that paddle switch in. Paddle switch is nice and big, so that I can hit it. I can hit it with my knee. Sometimes you'll accidentally hit it when you're pushing material through, but it's better to be able to turn it off easily, and so that if you're in an emergency, you can turn it off. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. It's stopped. Then I can remove my material. Don't be tempted to push it out of the way or reach across and grab it or reach back here and get it. Wait for it to stop. This is the dust collector, and it's an additional kickback guard because there's a piece that drops down and it's kind of been munched over time. I wanted the camera to be able to see the cut, and so you want to be able to see the cut. It's a good question because when you're moving, when you're pressing this into the table, and into the fence, I'm more concerned about the gap here at the fence than the blade. The blade's going to do what the blade's going to do. I don't really have to see the blade. I want to make sure that the leading edge and the trailing edge have no gap. If I have a gap, I'm going to bind, I'm going to cause friction, I'm going to get kickback. So I'm watching the fence as I'm pushing it through. I'm watching the gap at the fence. I'm holding pressure down. I like to just kind of, you saw me kind of just walk this through as I went. I do that. Some people just push it a little and then they'll push it a little and they'll slide back and push it a little, whatever is comfortable. I stay to the side. I'm not in the danger zone because if this kicks back, it's going back there. Know that if somebody's on the table saw, you should not be walking around them. You should not be talking to them. You should not be distracting them. If I'm cutting a full panel and I'm working with Beth or somebody else and I'm pushing it through, then we're working together. I'm start pushing it through, and then she starts to take it away from me, right? So she's helping me guide it through because we need two people to really keep it. You're communicating with one person. Other than that, there should be no talking to or distracting the person. You wait till they're done with their cut. Keep in mind that if I'm using some tool, scroll saw, bandsaw, whatever, and I drop a piece of material that was supposed to be louder. It's kind of anticlimactic. sometimes it'll startle you, right? So accidents happen, but know, be conscious that little startle could be me in here and I go like that, right? And so you're like, oh, I'm cutting a 3.5 inch. I only need the push stick for 3 inches. Well, what if something happens? It's an accident. Use the push stick, be comfortable, push it all the way through. Once it's locked in between the kickback guard and the fence, it's going to hold the material against the fence for the most part. So really all you're going to do is worry about pushing it through.